So we tossed them out. But because every society has to control sexuality, the vacuum has been filled. The alternative is not complete sexual freedom, because it's not practical. It doesn't work. The alternative is a new theology, if you like, a political theology. A new sexual morality has come in to fill the void. And that new sexual morality is, in fact, a political ideology. So we don't talk about sin and fornication and adultery anymore. We talk about sexism and misogyny and sexual harassment and sexual misconduct. We have a new vocabulary. It's just as disapproving. In fact, it's far more authoritarian than the old sexual morality. The old sexual morality was dictated by the Bible or by the church, but it was enforced by the local community, by the family, by parents, by social pressure. Okay? The new political morality is enforced by state officials, lawyers, judges, civil servants, gendarmes of various kinds. This is the new sexual morality. So instead, in the old days, we talked about sin. Now we talk about crime. Okay, now sexual transgressions don't make you ostracized from polite society or shunned by your people, the rest of your fellows. They make you liable for lawsuits and criminal prosecution. So we think we've evolved. We think we've become more moral, but in fact, in many ways, we've just substituted one form of authoritarianism for the old traditional controls. And I can elaborate on this if you like. But in many ways, it's somewhat. In some ways, we're kind of playing going through a cycle that is actually endemic to many revolutions. Right? Revolutions always start out, whether you look back at the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese, the Islamic Revolution. What do they all start out with? They all start out claiming to want freedom. They all want freedom. They all claim we want freedom. We just want to be individual freedom. We want to be left alone. We want to remove the authoritarianism of the state, and we want to be free. But what do? They often substitute their own authoritarianism. They substitute their own reign of terror, which is often far more authoritarian and far more bloody and violent than the old system. I think the words in many ways were summed up succinctly by Saint-Just, the fanatic of the French Revolution, whose slogan was, "No freedom for the enemies of freedom." Today we could say, "No human rights for the enemies of human rights." And this is basically what the sexual revolutionaries have done. They started off with this claimed demand, liberal demand, liberal in the broadest sense of that word, liberal for sexual freedom, but they ended up being illiberal, being highly authoritarian. And nowhere can you see this more. The litmus test, the canary in the mine shaft, is in many ways the fathers' groups and the fathers in the divorce courts. But others will follow. So I believe that the people I wrote about in the first book, taken into custody, the fathers who fall afoul of the divorce courts, are the authoritarianism that I described in that book is what many of us are going to see in the future, besides fathers' groups as well. So, what is the solution? What do I see as the solution to this? I think there is a solution. I think that if you follow my analysis of what's going on here, we have a solution. I started out by saying that there's no answer. There's no response. The sexual revolution is engulfing us, and the Christian groups and the others who oppose it don't have an effective response to how to fight back. But I hope that I'm providing one. I see two basic solutions. One of them is, first of all, simply, in many ways, we have the mechanisms. We have the mechanisms to solve this problem and to bring it under control. It's just a matter of having the political will to enforce it. On the one hand, basic civil liberties. Basic civil liberties that we in the Western world, especially the Anglophone world, if I may say so, have claimed to value, that we claim to be the champions of basic civil liberties going back to Magna Carta. Civil liberties like due process of law, basic freedom of expression in its various forms, the obligation to uphold the sanctity of contracts, of which the marriage contract is the most important. And yet all of these are routinely violated by the government today, often in the name of sexual freedom. So the one solution I see is the enforcement, basically, of civil liberties. Most countries have adequate protections for civil liberties in the Magna Carta, in the English Bill of Rights, in the American Bill of Rights, in virtually every constitution I know in the Western world. So basically enforcing civil liberties is one. But the other one I also see, we need some form of sexual morality, which is not political ideology. It's not the feminist political ideology. My chosen one would be the Christian political morality. Judeo-Christian if you like, perhaps Islamic Judeo-Christian if you want to. But we need some, the religious ones don't look so bad in retrospect. We laugh and we have great fun for decades now. We've been laughing at people like Mary Whitehouse. Some of everyone knows who Mary Whitehouse is in this country. But looking back on it, they may have had a point. They may have had Yvonne de Gaulle, another one in France. They may have had the right idea. It seems to me that if you look at the condition of what's been caused by sexual radicalism and sexual freedom in our society today, Christian groups should be crowing. They should be yelling from the rooftops. Me too. Or me, we told you so. Because the chaos that is being sown today in the name of sexual freedom is identifiable throughout our society. And yet the Christian groups seem to be hiding. They seem defensive. They seem frightened to speak out against these obvious violations of freedom, not only morality, but freedom as well. So I don't understand this. I sense today a sense of despair among Christian groups, men's groups. I mean, nobody seems to be getting anywhere. But I don't think that's necessary. I think what I'm offering here, I hope, in my analysis, I hope that I'm offering a hope. I'm offering a way out of this. We need to take on, and the solution there, again, is to take on the sexual revolution in its entirety. Not just abortion, not just same-sex marriage, not just your pet grievance or mine. If you're a divorced father, your pet grievance may be father's rights. If you're a Christian, your pet grievance may be abortion. It won't work that way. The sexual revolution is an ideology that, in all of its facets, it needs to be taken on, and it's very dangerous. Both the libertarian side of it and the authoritarian side of it. So I think we need to look at the whole thing. I think when we do that, we will create a larger coalition of people who have a stake in restoring sexual order from sexual chaos. We have Christian groups, we have Jewish groups, we have religious groups generally, Muslim groups, generally have an interest in restoring sexual order. We have men's groups, fathers groups, parents groups, parents generally. I teach at an institution that many of our students are homeschooled, so parents who homeschool their students, their children. You could create a larger coalition of people who, all of them in their way, are afflicted, are affected, or injured by the sexual revolution, instead of their own parochial, narrow grievances and complaints. So I think that's critical. We have, as I say, in the Western world, most countries, adequate due process safeguards in our Constitution. We have adequate, more than adequate, in my view, human rights conventions internationally that provide for the rights of parents, for example, the rights of married people. The legal mechanisms are there. What we lack is the political will to use them to stand up and speak against the sexual radicals and show how dangerous they are, not just to Christians, not just to men, but to freedom generally in our society. And we have the potential, I think, here to be more proactive and more aggressive, rather than so defensive. So that's the that's the argument generally of the book, and my approach to it. And what I can elaborate on. There's a number of points I realize I've talked about a lot, and there's a number of things I could expound upon and give you examples of from the book. But my main concern here tonight is maybe to just make you think about it a little more outside the box, and consider some of the things that maybe, from whatever perspective you come from, you haven't considered. The other thing, I'll just add one other point, our theme of the book I haven't talked about, and this is a contentious one here in Europe, but I think it's at least got to be aired. And I think in many ways much of the soil that the sexual revolution has grown out of, much of the precondition for that has been laid by the welfare state. And sooner or later, I think we in the Western world have got to come to grips with the welfare state. I don't go into this in great detail, but it cannot be a taboo. It cannot be off limits. It has to be on the table. It's got to be it's got to be at least open to discussion, because it represented a huge innovation in the role of government into private family life that had never been undertaken before. Many of the ills that I describe in the book